He will not quit. He must be fired. And the person to do it is Jagmeet Singh. Break the costly coalition with Trudeau to trigger a carbon tax election.
You're not going to see Justin Trudeau or Pierre Poilievre on a picket line, but you'll always see me and Alexandre and New Democrats in solidarity with you. We were founded by workers and unions. We will always stand in solidarity with you.
I'm fairly confident that that agreement is a good agreement, it's a strong agreement, and we'll get to the end of June.
We're still a year plus away from the election. I'm focused on making sure we're delivering through that election the kinds of things that Canadians need.
That's the Prime Minister's line. He's got a year before facing the national electorate, but as we speak, his party is fighting for 2 House of Commons seats in by-elections set for just 2 weeks from today, one in Winnipeg and one in Montreal. The Liberals kicked off the summer with a major surprise by-election loss in Toronto. So did the summer set the stage for any recovery, or is the Prime Minister up for more ballot blues? Let's bring in the front bench with me tonight. Former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant. He's the CEO of Space Canada. Former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt. She's the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is here, as is the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Rob Benzie. Hi, everybody. Hope you had a great summer. Very happy to see you all.
Hey, guys.
Brian, I'll start with you because the last time we convened was, I believe, like the day after that by-election loss. Is the strategy the Liberals employed over the summer what you would have expected on the heels of that?
Well, not with the context of the heels of the by-election, because one would say after that there would have had to been some big change to try to demonstrate to caucus, to Liberals across the country, and more importantly to Canadians that they got the message and they're going to be doing something drastic to make some big change to get the course where it needs to be going. That said, I do think that they're listening to advice that somebody's given them that I started, I'd like to think, about a year ago, where we were talking about all the sort of moving pieces for the Liberals, and the advice I gave was just govern, just focus on governing. I mean, the best way in which they can prepare for the re-election attempt is just to try to address the major challenges, and it sounds like coming out of the cabinet that's their focus. The challenge now, to the way that you frame the question, is there's a lot of water under the bridge. I still think governing and doing a good job of addressing the costs that people are feeling over the last little while, and trying to make sure that they're focused on the things that people care about will be the best thing they can do. But with the politics of by-elections that they should have won on paper not going their way, internally and with some Liberal organizers, I think that there's still going to be a need for some change to be signaled by the Liberals.
What's interesting, though, Lisa, as Brian lays out, is the calls, even within caucus, came very shortly after that by-election loss for more substantive change. Like the people, the Prime Minister himself and the people around him made a conscious decision not to pursue that kind of agenda through the summer, or even at their cabinet retreat just last week, right? Like what they're presenting to Canadians right now, I think is a conscious choice not to say there's going to be major change. Do you think that's the right decision strategically?
I don't. And I'll tell you why, because he's not listening to people. He's not listening to his own caucus. He may not be listening to cabinet ministers who may have points of view. But even that last clip, Vassy, that you had of the Prime Minister, what he said is that he is going to make sure he's delivering on what people need. Well, he's decided what people need. On the other hand, Pierre Poilievre's going across the country, crisscrossing, and asking people what it is they want. And what people are saying that they want is they want safety and they want affordability in their lives. And he's promising that, whereas the Prime Minister is saying, well, I know what you need. I've got this. I'm going to tell you what you guys need. And that is the wrong way to approach Canadians right now, because they are hurting. So, no, I think he has to listen. He has to be shown to be listening to people other than the folks that are around him or himself.
I think, Tom, if you were to talk to Liberals right now, though, they would argue that sort of the reduced public nature of the Prime Minister's summer, like he was not as public as he has been in other summers, is a reference to what Lisa is talking about, that they spent their time listening, moving from different parts of the country to the next, trying to figure out what they could do to better address Canadians' needs. What I find interesting is at the conclusion of that, they decided like what they're doing is the right thing and not to put anything substantively different in the window.
No, it was Groundhog Day. I mean, from Charlottetown last summer to Halifax this summer is let's talk about this housing crisis we've just discovered. Yeah, but you've been there for 8-9 years in those two cases. One of the other things that I noticed is that Mr. Trudeau's team was not putting out his agenda. mean, that's a classic thing. You give the agenda that people know is going to be there so that journalists can come and ask questions. And journalists were not allowed to ask questions. There was one pool journalist who would go in and not be given much access. So there was very little news coming out of the summer. Maybe that's a strategy in and of itself. I'm not sure it's a winning strategy at this stage. I think that Trudeau's got to show that he's got some understanding of where the public wants to go right now. The answer that he's been giving for a year and a half since his numbers really started to fall in the polls is, I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing. And, there's a basic rule that when what you're doing doesn't work, try something else. And right now, they seem to be very, very low on ideas of what that something else could be. There are great, strong members of that cabinet. A lot of them, can be doing very important things. But what we wind up with in the papers is, you were just talking about the situation with supplying weapon systems to Ukraine. Months and months of waiting for Canada to even put the money on the table. We know that there are other aspects to that. But, that's the type of news that gets out there when you're not providing any news on your own.
Why do you think that they have decided that that's the strategy, though, Rob, that they're going to employ, right? Like, they're not immune to the polling that we're talking about. They do their own private polling. Somehow they decided over the last 2 months the best thing to do was to stay the track, govern as Brian laid out, and, in anticipation of, I think, the circumstances, the context changing, the economy getting better, people's personal plight getting better over the next year. Why do you think they arrived at that conclusion?
I think, Vassy, it was the only choice that they felt they had. I'm not sure I agree with it, but it's not my call to make. I think if I were them, I would be looking south of the border and seeing what the Democrats did to revitalize their party and their chances of winning an election. They changed leaders. And that's why Kamala Harris is in a lot better position than Joe Biden would have been against Donald Trump. And I think that Mr. Trudeau, we saw the last time the five of us were together, Vassy, was the morning after that by-election shocker here in Toronto, St. Paul's. That was the beginning of the summer. You'd think it was the beginning of a time of reflection for the Liberals. I actually thought it would be for the Prime Minister. I'm surprised he's still the leader of that party. But maybe a by-election loss in Montreal in 2 weeks will sober them up even more. Because I don't think that this is unwinnable for the Liberals in the future. I'm just not sure that it is, because Pierre Poilievre has made the same mistake I think that Donald Trump made, and made everything a referendum on the leader. It's always just inflation. Trudeau did this, Trudeau that. And just as Trump is blaming everything on Biden. And I think the problem with that is if they change leaders, and if the Liberals change leaders, all of a sudden that huge pillar of Mr. Poilievre's strategy is gone. And I think a lot of the anger toward the governing Liberal Party will be gone too. I'm not saying that they're suddenly going to close that 13 to 20% percentage point gap, but I think that it would be lower than it is now if they change leaders.
There is literally nobody who wants Justin Trudeau to remain as leader more than the people who surround Pierre Poilievre and Poilievre himself. That is another thing I learned over the summer, Brian. I wanted to get your take on what Rob flagged, and that is what the Montreal by-election in particular means, given this was Paul Martin's seat, former Liberal Justice Minister David Lametti as well, considered a very safe Liberal seat in a similar way as the Toronto St. Paul's one was. I think after that one, everyone thought, oh my gosh, this is an earthquake. As Paul Wells says, everyone except the Prime Minister. Does Montreal play out the same way if, in fact, they are to lose?
I mean, who knows, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we a week before the Toronto by-election, we all said, oh, yeah, I mean, that would be pretty bad, right? That would be pretty bad. And it ended up being, yes, a bit of a storm for the Prime Minister, but then the summer came and things kind of calmed down. Now, is everybody happy? I'm sure they're not, but the discontent, at least from the public-facing version of it, is really dissipated. So I think that, yes, it would be a big deal, and it would be yet another sort of big, huge push for people to ask themselves within the Liberal Party and Liberal government what they need to do to start to resonate. But I'm not sure anymore that would be enough to really propel them to do something huge. Now, the one thing I do want to just add, coming out of the cabinet retreat, which you would be better placed than I, but to comment on, but I do think they were talking about some bold action. So that is maybe the one thing that they said that will kind of change up. We'll come out with some big policies. I don't know what that could be from an electoral point of view that would be able to help them sort of spin things around and demonstrate that change, but maybe they have something in mind.
The only indicator we got was really around the possibility of massive change to immigration policy. They're looking at reducing permanent numbers, but still everything's like kind of looking ahead into the fall. No specific announcement other than on the temporary side. Lisa, last word to you on this topic. How important do you think that by-election is?
I think the by-election that just passed was very important because it woke people up, and I think that the by-elections to come are going to be equally important. I'm very interested in what my friend Tom Mulcair has to say about the announcement that some Liberal staffers are not going to be supporting the Liberal Party in Montreal, and are vocal about it. And that's just showing that there is a lot of tension within the party for a whole bunch of different reasons. And it's going to be difficult, I think, to see those two by-elections come and go. I would add one other thing. I do think that Pierre Poilievre understands very clearly the fact that without Trudeau in the seat, it's a different kind of electoral prospect for him. And that's why they're pivoting hard on their new media. And their media doesn't talk about Justin Trudeau anymore. It's going straight to the workers in the warehouses, to the servers, to the farmers and soldiers, et cetera, and talking to them directly, and doesn't mention Trudeau once. So maybe they took your advice, Vassy.
I would never offer advice to any political party. I'm going to go a bit long because Lisa's right. Tom, I do want to get your view on Montreal, if you can, in 30 seconds. What do you think is going to happen there?
It should be a slam dunk for the Liberals because the three parts of that riding, LaSalle is so Liberal, it should be easy. But Lisa's right. A lot of the Liberal staffers, on ideological reasons, have said they're not going to come in. Actually, your staffers are not really supposed to be there, should be volunteers, but they have very few volunteers left. So if they're not able to get out their vote in LaSalle, they could be in trouble. The Bloc's not really in play here. The Conservatives are not really in play here. The NDP has a very attractive candidate, well known in the area, city councillor, well liked. He's from the Verdun side. He should have that in a lock. Anything can happen, but I don't see how the Liberals could possibly lose unless their vote stays home, in which case we're right back to the Toronto-St. Paul scenario and a lot of soul searching for the Liberals.